People think freedom means doing whatever you want, but in reality, that is the greatest form of slavery. It sounds strange at first, even offensive to ears accustomed to hearing that freedom is simply the removal of all restrictions. Yet if you pause and examine life as it is, not as the slogans of the world describe it, you will see that this so-called freedom is nothing more than a polished chain. A man who claims to be free because he follows every desire is like a ship that has cut its anchor and now drifts wherever the current takes it. That ship has no captain, no direction, and no destiny. It is free only to crash upon the rocks. True freedom is not the liberty to say yes to every impulse, but the strength to say no when it is necessary. A child may say, I am free to eat all the sweets I want, but his indulgence leads to sickness. A youth may boast, I am free to waste my nights in pleasure, but the dawn comes with regret. A man may declare, I am free to drink until I forget my sorrows, but he awakens enslaved to a habit that mocks him. What the world calls freedom is too often slavery dressed in attractive clothes. The chains are invisible, but they tighten around the heart with every act of self-indulgence. Look at the addict who insists he is free because he chose his first drink, his first pill, his first escape. Ask him today if he still chooses. He will tell you that the bottle chooses for him, the craving dictates to him, the appetite commands him. Is that freedom? Or is that a man bound hand and foot, paraded by his own desires like a puppet on strings? Real freedom has always been connected with truth. Our Lord said, You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Freedom is not found in escaping truth, but in embracing it. Imagine a pianist who says, I want to be free. I will not practice scales. I will not obey the rules of music. He may pound the keys, but what comes out is noise. Another pianist submits to discipline, learns the structure, trains the fingers, and restrains the impulses. When he sits at the piano, he is free. Free to play back, free to improvise, free to make the instrument sing. Freedom was born not from the absence of law, but from obedience to law. So it is with the soul. The man who submits to God, who disciplines his passions, who orders his life according to virtue, becomes free in the highest sense. He is not swayed by every temptation, not dragged by every passing fashion, not enslaved to public opinion. He can say yes and he can say no because he is master of himself. But the man who rejects God in the name of liberty finds himself chained to false gods, money, lust, pride, vanity. He cries out, I am free, while the idols he serves laugh at his bondage. Consider history. Nations that proclaimed absolute freedom soon discovered the abyss. The French Revolution began with cries of liberty, yet ended with heads falling beneath the guillotine. Russia promised liberation from the chains of religion and kings, but delivered its people into the iron fist of tyranny. When freedom is defined as the absence of God, the end is never liberty but new forms of slavery, worse than the old. Look also at our modern age. We tell the young man he is free to waste his years in pleasures, free to destroy his body with excess, free to treat love as a temporary thrill. But one day he wakes up empty, tired, enslaved to habits he cannot break. We tell the young woman she is free to reject sacrifice, free to chase power at the cost of family, free to give away her heart without commitment. But one day she feels used, discarded, and wonders why the promises of freedom led only to loneliness. The world calls this progress, but the heart calls it change. True freedom is never against the law of God. It is born within it. The bird is free to soar through the sky, but only because it obeys the laws of aerodynamics. The fish is free to dart in the sea, but only because it remains in the water. Remove them from the law of their nature, and their freedom dies. So too with man, when he uproots himself from the divine law written in his soul, he does not ascend into liberty, he suffocates. What then is freedom? It is the power to choose the good, to embrace the truth, to give oneself in love. A man who is free is not the one who does what he likes, but the one who likes what he ought to do. The paradox is this: by surrendering to God, we discover liberty. The more we kneel, the more we rise. The more we die to self, the more alive we become. Think of the saints. Were they not the freest of all men? Francis of Assisi owned nothing, yet possessed joy greater than kings. Thomas More walked to the scaffold with a smile, freer than the tyrant who condemned him. Maximilian Kolbe gave his life for another in a dark prison cell, and in that act of sacrifice he was freer than the guards who held the keys. Their freedom did not consist in doing whatever they pleased, but in loving without fear. The tragedy of our time is that men confuse license with liberty. License says, I will do what I please. Liberty says, I will do what is right. License ends in chaos, liberty ends in peace. License leaves the soul restless because no indulgence satisfies. Liberty leaves the soul at rest because truth and love are inexhaustible. When you stand at the crossroad of choice, remember this every yes to sin is a new chain. Every yes to God is a broken chain. The false freedom of the world tells you, indulge, and you will be happy. The true freedom of Christ tells you, resist, and you will be strong. Surrender, and you will be free. So do not be deceived by the glitter of a false liberty. The man who boasts of doing whatever he wishes has already surrendered to his passions. But the man who bows before the will of God can stand upright before any power on earth. He may be poor, but he is free. He may be persecuted, but he is free. He may even be in chains, but in his soul he walks in liberty. And when he dies, he will enter the only kingdom where freedom has no end, for there he will be bound only by love. And what a sweet bondage that is. That, my friends, is the great paradox. To find freedom, we must lose ourselves. To be free, we must serve. To live, we must die. People think freedom means doing whatever you want, but in reality, that is the greatest form of slavery. Real freedom is found in truth and discipline, and above all, in God. A ship is a magnificent creation. Built with precision, designed to cross vast oceans, it is meant for movement, for adventure, and for reaching distant shores. Yet every ship, no matter how strong or advanced, needs an anchor. Without it, the ship becomes a helpless plaything of the waves, tossed about by winds it cannot control. The anchor is not a burden, it is a safeguard. It does not restrict the ship's journey, but secures it when storms rage. Now imagine a ship that boasts, I have cut away my anchor, I am free. At first, the declaration sounds bold. The vessel seems to glide proudly across the sea. But soon the waves grow restless, the wind changes direction, and the freedom the ship celebrated becomes its doom. It has no stability, no point of security, no reference outside itself. Its so-called liberty becomes a sentence of destruction. This ship is the image of modern man. He believes he is free because he has severed himself from God, from truth, from moral law. He declares, I will chart my own course, guided only by my desires. But what he calls freedom is drift. What he calls independence is vulnerability. When the storms of life arise, sickness, failure, betrayal, loneliness, he discovers he has no anchor to hold him firm. An anchor does not prevent the sea from being rough. It prevents the ship from being lost. So true faith does not remove suffering. It secures the soul in the midst of it. The believer still feels the winds of temptation, the waves of sorrow, the gales of fear. But he does not drift endlessly. He has something solid, something eternal to which his life is fastened. That anchor is God, and the chain is trust. The world ridicules the anchor. It says, why bind yourself with religion? Why submit to commandments? Why not cut loose and enjoy the open sea? Yet look closer at the lives that boast such liberty. Many are restless, moving from one pleasure to another, from one relationship to another, from one ideology to another. Like a ship without an anchor, they appear adventurous, but inside they are terrified of the storm that will one day expose their instability. Every man must choose his anchor. For some, it is money. For others, fame or power. But these anchors do not reach the seabed of eternity. When tested, they give way. Wealth disappears. Power shifts. Applause fades. Only the anchor of God holds firm in every tide and storm. To attach oneself to him is not a restriction of freedom, but the only assurance of it. Picture the sailor who lowers the anchor into the deep. He does not see where it lands, but he feels the tension in the chain, and he knows he is secure. So it is with faith. We do not see God with the eyes of the body, but we feel his pull in conscience, his strength in grace, his stability in truth. We are secured not because we see the bottom of the ocean, but because we trust the one who holds us fast. Without an anchor, a ship may move swiftly, but it never rests. Without God, a soul may be busy, even successful, but it never finds peace. The greatest tragedy is not to drift for a while, but to drift endlessly, to never arrive at the harbor for which we were made. Heaven is that harbor, and only those who have anchored their souls in Christ will reach it. The storms will come. The winds will howl. No life escapes the fury of the sea. But when you are anchored in God, the storm is not your master. You may sway, but you will not sink. You may tremble, but you will not be lost. For your security does not depend on your own strength, but on the firmness of the rock to which you are attached. So ask yourself today, are you a ship with an anchor or without one? Do you drift on the tides of opinion, desire, and fear, or are you secured in truth, faith, and God? Freedom is not in cutting loose from the anchor, but in knowing you are safe to voyage, because no storm can steal your destiny. The ship without an anchor is not free, it is doomed. But the soul anchored in God is both safe and free, destined for the eternal harbor of peace. Desire is one of the most powerful forces in human life. It can lift a man to greatness or drag him to ruin. Desire is like fire. When controlled, it warms the home and cooks the meal. When uncontrolled, it burns the house to ashes. The tragedy of our age is that men call every desire good simply because it is theirs. They mistake impulse for freedom and passion for power, never seeing the chains hidden within them. At first, every desire comes dressed as a friend. It whispers, "I will make you happy. Just give me what I want." The desire for pleasure, wealth, recognition, or comfort all seem harmless, even harmlessly human. But once granted, the desire returns not as a guest, but as a master. It does not knock politely. It demands, it insists, it enslaves. What was once a choice becomes a compulsion. Take the example of lust. A man tells himself, "I am free to indulge. This is my right." But soon he discovers he cannot stop. His thoughts are chained, his will is weakened, his relationships poisoned. What began as liberty becomes captivity. He has given his freedom in exchange for a chain, though it shines like gold. Or consider greed. A man begins by wanting comfort, then success, then abundance. None of these are evil in themselves. But when desire grows unchecked, it becomes hunger without end. No amount of wealth satisfies. The chain tightens with every coin added. The richer he becomes, the poorer his soul feels. He is no longer master of his money. His money is master of him. The same is true with power. One taste of authority, and the desire for more becomes insatiable. The man who once served others now manipulates them. He lives not to give, but to dominate. His throne is not a seat of freedom, but a prison of pride. Power becomes his master, and he its trembling slave. The irony is that desire promises joy, but delivers restlessness. It promises satisfaction, but leaves emptiness. The more it is fed, the hungrier it becomes. It is like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you grow. The chain is hidden at first, but soon its grip is undeniable. But not all desire is evil. God himself planted holy desires in the human heart, the desire for truth, for beauty, for love, for himself. These desires do not enslave, but liberate, because they lead the soul upward. The more you love truth, the freer your mind becomes. The more you love sacrifice, the freer your heart becomes. The more you love God, the freer your whole being becomes. The difference between holy desire and enslaving desire is this: one leads you beyond yourself. The other locks you within yourself. Sinful desires make the self the center. Holy desires make God the center. One produces chains that bind. The other produces wings that lift. Every man must examine his heart and ask, what do I desire most? Am I being mastered by my passions, or mastering them with God's help? For unchecked desire is not freedom, but slavery in disguise. The chains are hidden only until the soul awakens to the weight it carries. Better to see the chain now and break it than to deny it until eternity makes it unbreakable. So remember, not every desire is your friend. Some come offering gifts but carry shackles behind their backs. Only by surrendering our desires to God do we find true freedom. The world says, follow every desire and you will be free. Christ says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and you will live. The chains hidden in desire are broken only by the greater desire for God. Addiction always begins with the illusion of choice. A man says, I am free to take a drink, free to smoke, free to gamble, free to indulge. At first, he is correct. The act begins as a choice, and he mistakes the choice for freedom. But slowly, the choice fades. What began as liberty turns into necessity. The man who once said, I choose, begins to say, I must. The power to walk away weakens until he realizes that the decision is no longer his. This is the great deception of addiction. It pretends to be a friend, offering comfort, relief, excitement, or escape. It whispers, you can stop whenever you want. You are in control. Yet with every repetition, the chain grows stronger, though it remains invisible. By the time the man sees the chain, it is too heavy to break by his own strength. Addiction steals freedom while pretending to give it. The gambler thinks he is free to place a bet, but in truth the bet has placed its grip upon him. The drinker believes he is free to lift a glass, but soon the glass lifts him. The man glued to his screen swears he can stop at any time, but the endless scrolling mocks his claim. The addict is not choosing anymore. He is being chosen by his craving. The illusion of choice is most dangerous because it blinds the soul to its slavery. If a man were chained by iron, he would cry for release. But when he is chained by desire, he insists he is free. He defends his addiction, justifies it, even celebrates it. Only when the destruction becomes unbearable does he admit that his so-called freedom was a prison all along. What addiction truly reveals is the weakness of man without God. Human will alone is fragile. Left unguarded, it bends to habit, to impulse, to temptation. We need a power outside ourselves to break the illusion. That power is grace. Grace restores the will, strengthens the conscience, and brings light to see the chain for what it is. Without grace, the addict continues to believe the lie, I can stop when I want. Look at the lives destroyed by addiction. Marriages broken, children wounded, friendships lost, souls scarred. Each began with a simple choice, an innocent act, a moment of freedom. But sin always takes you further than you planned to go, keeps you longer than you intended to stay, and costs you more than you were willing to pay. The addict pays with his dignity, his peace, and sometimes his very life. But here lies hope. Addiction is not the end of freedom. It is the revelation of how desperately man needs true liberation. Christ came not to chain man further, but to set him free. If the Son sets you free, Scripture says, you will be free indeed. When man surrenders his addiction to God, he discovers that the chains are not eternal. What the will cannot do, grace can. Where desire enslaves, love redeems. Recovery begins when the illusion is shattered. The addict must admit, I am not free. I have lost my choice. Humility becomes the doorway to healing. Pride insists on control. Humility asks for help. And when that cry reaches God, the soul begins its journey back to freedom. The illusion dissolves, and truth becomes the first step toward liberation. The paradox is clear. The man who insists he is free is already bound, while the man who admits he is bound has already begun to be free. Addiction thrives in darkness. It dies in the light of confession, discipline, and grace. The illusion of choice vanishes when the true choice is made, to turn from slavery toward God. So, let us not mistake the counterfeit for the real. Addiction is not freedom. It is bondage painted with bright colors. The only real choice is between the chains of desire and the freedom of God. To choose sin is to lose choice. To choose God is to find it again. That is the truth hidden beneath the illusion of addiction, and it is a truth that sets the soul free. Every man wants to be free. From the moment he learns to walk, he resists the hand that tries to hold him. From the day he begins to speak, he insists on his own way. Nations rise and fall in the name of liberty. Individuals sacrifice everything for it. Yet strangely, the more men chase freedom without truth, the less free they become. They escape one master only to find themselves chained to another. Truth is not a wall that blocks freedom. It is the only door through which freedom can enter. Without truth, freedom is a mirage, a glittering illusion that vanishes as you approach it. Imagine a man wandering in a desert, chasing a mirage of water. He thinks he is free because no one restrains him, but his steps only lead him deeper into thirst. So too, a man who rejects truth believes he is free, but he is only enslaved to error. Consider the man who denies moral truth. He says, there is no right or wrong, only what I feel. At first, he feels liberated, but soon his feelings change, his desires contradict each other, and he discovers he is not master but servant of impulse. The absence of truth has not made him free. It has made him unstable. He has no compass, no anchor, no path. Or think of the student who despises the discipline of mathematics, declaring that number should not bind his mind. He may scribble whatever he pleases, but he will never solve a problem, never build a bridge, never touch the stars. Only by submitting to the truth of mathematics does he gain the freedom to create. Likewise, only by submitting to the truth of God does the soul gain the freedom to live. Truth is not an invention of man, it is a gift from God. To reject it is not bravery, but blindness. When a pilot ignores the truth of gravity, his plane does not stay in the air because he wills it so, it falls. When a man ignores the truth of morality, his life does not remain intact because he wishes it, it collapses. Freedom without truth is not flight, it is a fall. The world often preaches tolerance as the highest virtue. But tolerance without truth becomes indifference. It does not liberate, it numbs. To tell a man lost in darkness, every road is as good as another, is not compassion. It is cruelty. Real love points him to the road that leads home. Real freedom is not wandering endlessly in the night. It is walking confidently in the light of truth. Christ declared, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Notice the order: first knowledge of truth, then freedom. The world reverses it. It promises freedom first and truth later, if at all. But freedom divorced from truth is a seed without soil, a flame without air. It cannot live. Only truth sustains liberty because truth alone reveals the meaning of existence, the purpose of suffering, the dignity of man, and the destiny of the soul. Truth is demanding, yes, it does not bend to our whims. It asks for obedience, for sacrifice, for humility. But this very demand is what makes it liberating. A train is free only when it runs on its tracks. A fish is free only when it swims in water. A soul is free only when it lives in truth. To leave the tracks is not liberty, but disaster. To leave the water is not freedom, but death. The greatest prison is not made of stone or steel. It is made of lies. The liar is always looking over his shoulder, the deceiver always guarding his tongue, the sinner always inventing excuses. But the man who walks in truth has nothing to hide, nothing to fear, nothing to lose. He is free because he is real, and reality is the foundation of freedom. So let us remember, freedom without truth is an empty promise. The only door to freedom is truth. Truth about God, truth about man, truth about life and death. To live in truth is to live in freedom. For truth does not bind the soul. It sets it soaring. The chains fall, the illusions vanish, and the heart rests at last. For the door has opened, and on the other side is the only freedom worth having, the freedom to love, to serve, and to live forever in God. The word law often sounds harsh to modern ears. People imagine chains, restrictions, burdens, and limitations. They say, liberty means doing whatever I please. Law only gets in my way. Yet the paradox is this: without law, liberty dies. Law is not the enemy of freedom. It is the very condition that makes freedom possible. Law is not a cage, but a pathway. Think of a violinist. He is not free to play music unless he first obeys the laws of harmony, pitch, and rhythm. To ignore those laws is not liberty, but noise. By submitting to the discipline of music, he becomes free to create beauty. The same applies to every art, every science, every craft. Obedience to law opens the door to liberty. Consider the driver on a busy highway. If every man makes his own rules, chaos ensues. Speed where you will, turn where you wish, ignore the signs, and you will have collisions, not freedom. But when each obeys the rules, the road becomes a safe place where movement is possible. Law does not kill liberty on the road, it guarantees it. So it is with the moral law. The commandments of God are not shackles meant to rob us of joy. They are guardrails along the cliff that prevent us from plunging into ruin. They are the instructions of the Creator who knows how His creation works best. To despise the law is not bravery, it is folly. To embrace it is not slavery, it is wisdom. The great lie of modern man is that liberty comes from rejecting divine law. But history proves the opposite. Every society that abandoned God's law in the name of freedom ended in tyranny. When men will not be ruled by the 10 Commandments, they will be ruled by 10,000 policemen. When the law of God is cast aside, the laws of dictators multiply. True liberty begins with self-mastery. A man who cannot govern himself is not free. He is a slave to his appetites. Law teaches discipline. It trains the will to say no to selfishness and yes to what is good. The athlete who obeys the rules of training is not less free, but more free, because his body becomes strong. Likewise, the soul that obeys God's law becomes strong in virtue, capable of real freedom. Some complain that divine law is too narrow, too demanding. But look closely at those who live without it. They may shout liberty, yet they are restless, broken, addicted, enslaved. The law of God is demanding, yes, but its demand leads to peace. Christ himself said, "My yoke is easy, and my burden is light." A yoke may look like a restraint, but when it fits well, it makes the load bearable. The law of God is that yoke. What looks like burden is actually relief. Law is not opposed to love, it protects it. Imagine a marriage without fidelity, a family without rules, a society without justice. What begins as freedom ends in betrayal and despair. Love needs law to endure. Liberty needs law to survive. The commandments of God are not obstacles to happiness, but the foundation of it. The saints were the freest people who ever lived. Yet they were most obedient to God's law. Francis of Assisi, who renounced everything, was freer than the richest king. Thomas More, who chose death rather than deny God's truth, was freer on the scaffold than his tyrant was on the throne. Their obedience did not bind them. It liberated them to love, to give, to live without fear. So let us not fear the word law. Law is not a prison, it is a path. The man who lives without law drifts into slavery, but the man who embraces the law of God walks into liberty. For liberty without law is chaos, and law without liberty is tyranny. But law joined with liberty, God's law joined with man's freedom, becomes the music of the soul, the harmony of life, and the song of eternity. Every age cries for liberty. Every revolution begins with the shout of freedom. Yet strangely, the louder the cry for liberty, the quicker it turns to tyranny. History repeats this lesson again and again. Liberty without God, liberty without truth, liberty without law always becomes the seat of oppression. Take ancient Rome. It began as a republic, with laws, order, and civic duty. But when liberty turned into license, when bread and circuses replaced virtue, the republic collapsed. The people, enslaved to pleasure, handed power to Caesars who promised more indulgence. Liberty decayed into dictatorship, and the empire that ruled the world crumbled from within. Look at the French Revolution. It began with noble words, liberty, equality, fraternity. Yet liberty without God soon turned on itself. The guillotine became its symbol. In the name of freedom, thousands lost their heads. What began as revolt against tyranny ended in terror worse than the kings they despised. The same story unfolded in Russia. Promises of liberation from monarchy and religion filled the air. But once faith was stripped away, a new tyranny arose, stronger, darker, more merciless. The chains of Tsars were replaced with the chains of communism. Liberty without God did not bring peace. It brought gulags and mass graves. History's lesson is clear. When liberty forgets its source, it destroys itself. True liberty is not the freedom to do whatever one wants, but the freedom to do what is right. When a nation abandons God, liberty becomes a mask for selfishness. And selfish liberty quickly becomes chaos, which cries out for order. The order that follows is always tyranny. Consider even our modern world. We boast of unprecedented freedom, freedom to indulge every desire, freedom to define truth as we please, freedom to cast aside every tradition. Yet beneath the banner of liberty, addictions grow, families break, communities fracture, and when chaos spreads, the demand rises, give us stronger laws, give us greater control. Liberty abused prepares the throne for tyranny. The pattern is as old as humanity. The Israelites, freed from Egypt, demanded idols and pleasures. Their liberty nearly destroyed them until God's law restored order. Freedom is not sustained by passion, but by principle. Without truth, without virtue, without God, liberty becomes a fire without boundaries. It does not warm, it burns. The paradox is this: liberty and tyranny are not opposites. One grows out of the other when liberty is severed from God. The very gift meant to ennoble man becomes the weapon that enslaves him. The hand that holds liberty without truth soon builds the chains of tyranny. Therefore, history does not simply warn us, it pleads with us. Liberty must be anchored in God, guided by truth, and disciplined by law. Otherwise, the cycle repeats: freedom to chaos, chaos to tyranny, tyranny to ruin. The nations that forget this lesson will learn it again, painfully, as every empire before them has done. So remember, liberty is a sacred gift, but a fragile one. It is not sustained by slogans, revolutions, or indulgence. It is sustained by virtue, sacrifice, and obedience to God. History's lesson is unmistakable. When liberty forgets its creator, it does not last long. It becomes tyranny, and tyranny is always the funeral of nations. Modern man lives surrounded by promises. Advertisements promise happiness if only you buy. Science promises salvation if only you wait. Politics promises peace if only you vote. But beneath the glittering slogans, the promises of modern man are empty. They shine like gold, but when touched, they crumble into dust. One of the greatest false promises is that wealth brings freedom. Earn more, spend more, own more, whispers the age. Yet the man who gains the whole world often loses his soul. The more he owns, the more he fears losing. His possessions possess him. Wealth promises liberty, but delivers slavery. Another false promise is pleasure. Modern man insists that happiness is found in indulgence. Eat more, drink more, entertain yourself endlessly. Yet the man who chases pleasure is never satisfied. The more he consumes, the emptier he feels. Pleasure is a tyrant that demands more and gives less. until the soul is starved while the senses are stuffed. Science, too, makes its promises. It promises to conquer disease, to extend life, to unlock the secrets of the universe. These are noble pursuits. But when science claims to replace God, it becomes idolatry. It can extend the length of life, but it cannot tell us what life is for. It can build weapons, but not peace, rockets, but not meaning. Science promises heaven on earth, but often delivers new ways of creating hell. Politics shouts its own promises. Each party declares itself the savior of the people. Each leader proclaims a new dawn. But history shows the opposite. Politics without morality becomes corruption. Power without God becomes oppression. Politicians promise liberty, but deliver bureaucracy. They promise unity, but sow division. The throne of man cannot bear the weight of God. Modern man also promises that truth is whatever you make it. Believe what you like, live as you wish, define reality for yourself. It sounds liberating, but it enslaves. When everyone has his own truth, no one can find the truth. Confusion reigns and the loudest voice rules. Relativism promises tolerance, but produces chaos. Technology, too, seduces with promises. It promises connection, but often breeds loneliness. It promises efficiency, but often robs us of peace. A man may hold the whole world in his phone, yet have no one to hold his hand. He may scroll for hours and still hunger for meaning. Technology promises to make us gods, but it makes us slaves to screens. Behind all these false promises is one great lie, that man can be his own savior, that he needs no God, no law, no truth beyond himself. It is the oldest lie in the garden, whispered by the serpent. You shall be like gods. Every age believes it anew, and every age collapses under its weight. The true promise is different. Christ did not promise riches, but a cross. He did not promise endless pleasure, but eternal joy. He did not promise a kingdom of this world, but a kingdom not of this world. His promises were not false glitter, but eternal gold. They cost everything, but they give everything. Modern man's false promises are loud, immediate, and temporary. God's promises are quiet, demanding, and eternal. One ends in emptiness, the other in fullness. One enslaves, the other liberates. One deceives, the other delivers. The task of every soul is to discern the difference, to pierce through the lies of modernity and cling to the eternal promise of Christ, the only promise that never fails. The very word surrender sounds like defeat. The word tells us that to surrender is to lose, to be conquered, to admit weakness. Yet in the gospel, surrender is not defeat, it is victory. The paradox is clear. The man who surrenders to God is the only one who is truly free. Think of the soldier who refuses to lay down his arms. He may fight until the end, but he is crushed by a stronger enemy. But the man who surrenders to God does not fall into slavery. He falls into mercy. He lays down his weapons not to be destroyed, but to be saved. What looks like loss is in fact gain. Every man resists surrender because pride whispers, you can do it alone. You need no master. Yet this illusion of independence enslaves him. The man who refuses God's yoke becomes the slave of his own passions, anger, lust, greed, fear. In trying to be master of himself, he becomes prisoner to himself. The only escape is surrender. Christ himself showed us the paradox. In Gethsemane, he prayed, not my will, but thine be done. That surrender led not to weakness, but to the greatest triumph in history, the resurrection. When Christ surrendered, death was conquered. His apparent defeat on the cross became the victory of the world. Surrender is also the secret of peace. The man who clings to control is always restless, fearful that things will not go his way. But the soul that says, thy will be done, rests secure. To surrender to God is to lay every burden at his feet, to trade anxiety for trust, to exchange fear for faith. The world's surrender breaks the heart. God's surrender heals it. This paradox shines even in human love. A husband and wife who never surrender their will to one another cannot find union. Love requires giving up the self, not in destruction, but in fulfillment. The same is true with God. Only the surrendered heart can be filled, for only the empty vessel can be poured into. The greatest saints were the greatest examples of surrender. Francis of Assisi surrendered wealth and found joy. Augustine surrendered his passions and found truth. Teresa of Calcutta surrendered comfort and found Christ in the poor. What they gave up was small compared to what they gained. Surrender never impoverishes, it enriches. The paradox is that man fights to keep his will, fearing he will lose himself, but only in surrender does he truly find himself. He who loses his life for my sake shall find it, said Christ. To clutch life is to lose it. To release life into God's hands is to gain eternity. Surrender is not the end of freedom, but the discovery of it. The chains fall away when the will is given to God. The man who bows to God stands taller than the man who bows to none. For to surrender to God is not to be crushed, but to be raised, not to be diminished, but to be exalted. Thus, the paradox remains: surrender to the world, and you are defeated. Surrender to God, and you are victorious. The only chains that bind are the chains we refuse to lay down. The only throne we can sit upon is the one we first kneel before. In surrender, man finds the very thing he sought in resistance: freedom, peace, and eternal life. At first glance, the saints look like prisoners. They bound themselves to vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They denied themselves pleasures, restrained their desires, and lived under strict discipline. To the world, this seems like chains, but to the saints, these chains were wings. What the world calls bondage, they discovered as freedom. Consider St. Francis of Assisi. He renounced his wealth, stripped himself of fine clothes, and embraced poverty. To his peers, it looked like madness, like a prison of deprivation. Yet Francis was freer than the rich merchants who feared losing their coins. His poverty unchained him from greed, so he could walk the earth singing like a lark. St. Augustine, before his conversion, was a prisoner to his passions. He indulged every desire, yet remained restless and unsatisfied. But once he surrendered to Christ, once he bound himself to God's truth, he became free. His famous words echo across the ages: "Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." His so-called prison was the key to his liberation. Take St. Paul. In chains, beaten, and thrown into prison cells, he sang hymns at midnight. To Rome, he was a captive. To heaven, he was free. The walls of his cell could not contain his spirit. His letters, written in confinement, have liberated millions of souls across centuries. His prison became a pulpit. His chains became testimony of true freedom. Or think of St. Thomas More. He sat in the Tower of London, awaiting death because he would not betray his conscience. The world saw him as a prisoner of the state, but he was freer than the king who condemned him. The king was bound by fear and lust for power, while More was free in truth, even on the scaffold. The paradox is this: the saints accepted the prison of discipline so they could escape the prison of sin. The world, chasing liberty without restraint, ends up enslaved to its own appetites. But the saints, who chose to restrain themselves for God, walked with unburdened souls. Their cells were small, but their horizons stretched to eternity. The secret of the saints is love. Love makes burdens light and chains sweet. The mother who wakes in the night for her child does not feel imprisoned, though she sacrifices sleep. The saint bound to God does not feel trapped, for love transforms restraint into joy. What the world calls chains, the saints call devotion. Freedom without truth always decays into slavery. The saints understood that only truth makes us free, and that truth is Christ. To bind oneself to him is not servitude, but liberation. Like a train on its tracks, the soul runs fastest and safest when it follows the law of God. Leave the tracks, and it derails. Stay on them, and it flies. The saints teach us that external prisons do not matter. The only true prison is sin. A man in chains who loves God is freer than a tyrant on his throne. A nun behind convent walls may see more of heaven than a millionaire who travels the world. Freedom is not where the body stands, but where the soul belongs. So the saints were prisoners who were free. Their chains were chosen, their prisons embraced, their surrender complete. And in that surrender, they discovered joy the world could not steal. Their lives proclaim the paradox that echoes through eternity: only the prisoners of God are truly free. Every human heart desires freedom. From the child who resists bedtime to the nation that resists tyranny, the cry for freedom is universal. But there is a dangerous confusion between two words that seem alike, yet are worlds apart: license and liberty. One elevates man, the other degrades him. One builds civilizations, the other destroys them. License is the freedom to do whatever one pleases. It recognizes no law, no boundary, no responsibility. It promises happiness but delivers slavery. Liberty, on the other hand, is the freedom to do what is right. It flourishes only in truth, only under God. License exalts the self, liberty bows to truth. The soul must choose between the two. Consider a train. License would tell the train to leave the tracks, to go wherever it pleases. But once it leaves the rails, it crashes. Liberty, however, is the train running on its tracks, guided by order, moving swiftly toward its goal. True freedom is not the absence of law, but the discovery of the law that fulfills our nature. History shows the tragedy of license. When nations cast off God's law in the name of freedom, they fall into chaos. The French Revolution cried liberty, but practiced license, and the guillotine answered. The Roman Empire indulged license, and decay consumed it. License always ends in tyranny because unrestrained passion demands a master to control the chaos it unleashes. License deceives because it feels sweet at first. The young man thinks he is free when he indulges every desire when no one tells him no. But soon his desires rule him. His habits harden into chains. He is not free to say no to drink, no to lust, no to anger. License masquerades as liberty, but it enslaves the soul. Liberty, by contrast, may feel demanding. It requires discipline, self-control, obedience to higher truth. Yet the man who lives in liberty stands strong. He can say no to temptation, yes to virtue. He is not mastered by passion, but masters it. His soul is free because it belongs to God, not to sin. Christ himself drew the line clearly. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. He did not say, do whatever you please. He did not preach license. He preached liberty rooted in truth. His cross looked like bondage to the world, but it was the supreme act of freedom, the choice to lay down his life in love. Saints have always chosen liberty over license. St. Thomas More chose conscience over compromise, even unto death. St. Agnes chose purity over passion, even at the cost of her young life. To the world, they looked imprisoned. In truth, they were free. Their liberty was costly, but it was eternal. Each soul faces this choice, daily license or liberty. Do we choose the fleeting thrill of passion or the lasting joy of truth? Do we serve the false freedom that enslaves or the true freedom that saves? The battlefield is not only in nations, but in every heart. The paradox remains, the man who chooses license loses both freedom and happiness. The man who chooses liberty gains both. License is slavery disguised as freedom. Liberty is freedom disguised as surrender. And so before every soul, every day, stands this eternal choice, license or liberty. The decision shapes not only a life, but a destiny.